Hello everybody, and welcome to the Mission Magic session, where we are very lucky to have Jacqui Mann with us today. I'm Lucy Makara. I run Mission Magic and the Mission Mastermind, among other things, also Rethink Press and Book Magic. But more importantly, Jacqui Mann is the founder of J. Mann Associates. Jacqui is a trusted HR strategist with more than 20 years' experience advising business leaders across the UK. She is also the author of Recruit, Inspire and Retain, How to Create a Company Culture to Grow Your Business. And she's very generously said that she'll give a free ebook, copy of her book, to anybody who writes a book in the chat. If you'd like a copy of Jacqui's book, write book in the chat and we'll send it to you later. So Jacqui has worked extensively with organisations in both the public and private sectors, guiding them through complex HR challenges such as TUPE transfers, business acquisitions and merger, organisational restructuring, and the development of long-term HR strategies. And one thing that Jacqui has developed is her unique framework, which is called PACE. So why don't we start with that, Jacqui? What is the PACE framework and why is it important?
Okay, well, I've got a slide here that I'm going to share with you so that you can actually see what the PACE is. Okay,
Great.
everybody see that? So I think before I actually talk about the PACE, I'd like to sort of address your second part of the question, really, is why is it important? So you touched on my experience that I've had with lots of businesses. So I've worked in private sector, public sector, not-for-profit, and I've worked in various different industries. So I've worked in the care sector, manufacturing, retail, leisure, day nurseries, and I've got a specialism in the hospitality sector. But what I noticed about working in all those different industries is they all had the same problems when it came to their people strategy. So that's made me then sort of think about, well, if they've all got the same sort of problems, how can we look at a way to address that? And then that's where PACE came in. So about turning people strategy into business results. So the first part of PACE is quite simple. It looks at the people in your organization. It looks at whether you've got the right people, whether they're in the right roles, whether the structure is right. Then I look at the alignment. So that's where, are the people aligned to the right roles, and are they aligned to the business goals that the business is trying to achieve? Because if they're not aligned, then it certainly isn't going to work. And then we will look at change. And I think change is an area that is often underestimated by business leaders. That's how that actually affects people. It affects people in many different ways. And it's looking at how we're going to manage that change, what things need to be put into place to make sure that the change is workable for everybody and that everybody understands what's going on. And then the final phase of it is about execution. And execution is about having a plan. It's about setting deadlines and it's about setting timelines. And most importantly for me, it's about making people accountable so the business gets the results that it wants in its HR strategy. So that's really what PACE is about.
Well, that sounds brilliant, Jacqui. But what makes your approach different? Is this something that all kind of HR strategists put into place, or is this really unique to your way of approaching things?
I think I'm slightly different from some other HR people, I think, HR strategists, because I tend to focus on what the business wants to get out of it. What is the results that that business wants? And I go into some organisations and they do have an HR strategy, but it's very long. It's full of fluff, I would say. And I look at it and think, I really don't know what this is supposed to mean. What are they trying to say? What are they trying to achieve? So my approach to HR is very practical, very commercially focused, and also making sure that it's a no-nonsense approach. I'm very straightforward in the way that I talk to people. And I want to make sure that we're making things simple. You know, HR can sometimes have so much jargon and all these things. And at the end of the day, it's like, well, what does that actually really mean? You know, what is it you're trying to achieve? So I think that's what makes my approach slightly different. I don't do pink and fluffy, is what I always say.
Well, that that sounds very positive. I think I do think HR departments, HR in general, has rather a bad rap for being a bit pink and fluffy in some cases. So
It certainly can do. Yes,
so being
definitely.
very practical about it is
Mhm.
yeah, different and incredibly beneficial.
Yes.
So Jacqui, what kind of businesses usually come to you for help, and what sorts of problems are they facing?
There's different types of businesses. So they might be businesses that are looking for growth. So they might be looking to grow their business by acquisition. So that's one type of business. You know, they might be acquiring a business, and often the people side of the business often gets lost with the when they're looking to do the acquisition. They're focusing on the targets and how much money it's going to be, and they forget about the people side, and most importantly, they forget about the culture side and whether that culture is going to fit. Oh, I've just lost you now.
Oh, I
Oh,
can see
oh,
you.
I've just lost you. I had a message pop up on my screen, so I got rid of it because it was distracting me, and then I lost you, which is not
Oh,
very.
well, we can. I think we can. Can you hear me?
I can see you now. That's it. You're
Oh,
back.
good. Jolly good.
Okay. So sorry, I was saying. So you've got the ones that come for growth. Then I've got clients who come to me because they want to restructure, and that might be they're restructuring because they need to downsize. So recently, we've just done a project for a hospitality group who want to downsize. So they've looked at making 90 people redundant. But it's not that the business is failing, it's the structure just doesn't fit with the model of where they're trying to go now. So we needed to revisit that model. So we looked at the restructuring. And then the other types of business that will come to me is because they're looking to plan their exit. So they're looking at what strategy, their people strategy they need to make the business saleable. Because unfortunately, lots of businesses, you know, the HR bit is always the bit that doesn't get done. You know, in my book, I actually talk about the foundations, the 8 HR foundations that you need in place, you know, how you need to build them. I call them, you know, they can be the boring bits, really, you know, the contracts, the job descriptions, all of those things. But actually, they're all the important things you need in place if you're looking to sell your business. It's part of the due diligence, but it's often a big failing. You know, I go into clients and say, they want to restructure or make redundancies, and then we start looking at job descriptions, which actually they, you know, that they can't find them, or it's, you know, a couple of lines on a bit of paper. And so that for when you're looking to exit is very, very clear that they need to be in place. So those are really the 3 types of businesses that will come to me and the issues that they bring.
Okay, that's interesting. So, I mean, you've talked a bit about where businesses go wrong during change. Are there any other places where you typically find that businesses are just not understanding what they should be doing, or they've actually gone disastrously wrong during change, and you have to come in and tell them where, you know, what to look at and how they need to fix it?
Yeah, definitely. I think the communication is a key part of any change program, and the communication, you can never over communicate. And if you don't communicate to employees when change is happening, then they start to make it up, and then, you know, that's when things will get awful. People will start to leave, people start going off sick, so that affects productivity. So, you know, you need to make sure that that communication is very clear. You've got a proper communication strategy and everybody understands. And it's about being open and honest. It's about good communication as well as, you know, bad communication in a way, as in bad news. You need to make sure you're telling the truth to people because they'll find you out later. And then I think one of the other things that I see a lot of is that the leaders disappear. You know, they just bury their head in the sand and think, oh, well, we'll just leave HR to get on with that. And it's like with the culture side, you know, it has to come from the top. It has to be the leaders that are there seeing what's going on, supporting people. They need to be out there talking to people, being available. And often that's a big failing. They just don't communicate, and they're just seen as somebody who earns a lot of money and doesn't do very much. and it's all right for them, it doesn't affect them, which then doesn't create a very good culture at all. And then things can start to fail quite quickly.
Right. And do you find with the communications that leaders are kind of almost trying to hide things and think if we don't talk about it, nobody will
Yeah.
know and we'll just let them know when it's happened? Is
Yeah,
that a
absolutely.
typical
Yeah, they
mistake?
do. My approach is you have to be upfront. Sometimes there are things you can't tell people, like if you're going through a merger acquisitions, there's some things you can't say until it's actually taken place. But you need to be as upfront as you possibly can, telling people how things are. And if you don't know the answer, you tell them that as well. You can say, I don't know that at the moment, but once, I will try to find out and I will get back to you. But then, of course, it's important that you do get back to them.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
and I think it's what also is important on the communication side, going through any sort of change, is to make sure that everyone is given the same thing to communicate. That you've got, like in the big redundancy project we've just done, all of the managers were given scripts so that nobody's saying something they shouldn't say. Because also with the managers who go through these types of changes, they haven't got the experience either, and they're frightened they get it wrong. So they need as much help and support as they possibly can. But it's also about timing with communication and making sure people are all told at the same time, getting people together, that can be quite difficult if you've got people in different locations, but it can be done. It's a case of planning and making sure that that happens.
So you bring in this expertise and this knowledge and this experience to businesses who are sort of who may have, who have their own expertise, obviously, but this particular process is new to them.
Yeah, it can be. And I mean, I go into businesses and sometimes I go in, me and my team, and we all work on a project. Sometimes we go in and they've already got an HR department, and we'll be providing that extra resource. Often it's because they're firefighting in the HR department and they haven't got time to look at the strategy, or sometimes it's because they haven't got the skills in-house. So we will be there to support and guide or lead on the project as necessary. But it's having those it's building relationships then with the HR team, because sometimes that can be quite tricky as well.
Right, right. So going back to the PACE framework, which stage of PACE do businesses struggle with the most in your experience?
Well, I know the answer to that, but actually I was just thinking it would be nice if people put in the chat which one they thought it was.
Yes, absolutely. Have a guess. So just
Have a
just
guess.
remind us what the steps of PACE are, Jackie.
So we've got people, we've got alignment, change, and execution.
Okay, so what does everybody think that which one do you think is the most likely that businesses are going to struggle with? So Paula says change. Andy says change. Oh, interesting. Katharina says people, the bedrock of everything and the most ignored. Michaela says execution, and so does Sukaina, execution of the change. So maybe that's two. Nicole says people first, the mindset. So I think I think
Got
you've got a kind
various,
of range of responses there,
yeah,
Jackie. What is your answer?
execution,
Ah,
execution. There is so many times I go into companies, and in fact, I did stop working with a client once because we had so many plans and they planned it out, to the nth degree, pages and pages, and all of these actions that needed to happen. The thing is, they never did happen, and it just went on and on. And in the end, I said, I'm sorry, but I can't work with you, because to me, I don't feel that I'm actually getting anywhere then. I need to get the results. For the client and to make sure the business is getting out of it what it needs. But I see that so many times they might have a great HR strategy and a great plan, and they might even start it, but then they don't continue it. They just can't keep up that pace. That's where it comes from. They
right.
can't keep up that pace. Paula likes that one. They don't, it just, it starts off really well. And then it sort of peters off, and then suddenly it's like, oh, and the danger with that is that if you introduce it, you communicate it to the employees and everybody understands what's going to be happening, and then it doesn't happen, then basically you've failed. Then the next time you try to do something, you don't get any buy-in from employees because they're like, oh, well, we've been here before, nothing happened, nothing changed. And you just go round and round in circles. So you have to make sure that you commit to it and that you see it through to the end.
Yeah.
You might
Yeah.
need to make some changes along the way, but you still need to get those results.
Yes, yes. Well, Katharina says that's interesting that I think that you talk about execution because she says the lack of execution to her is a people problem, culture perhaps, lack of knowing how and understanding why.
Yeah, it could be. And I think that's where you talk about the people and the alignment and the change, and it's making sure that everybody understands what's happening, that you've got a plan in place, um, it's communicated to everybody, and then the execution part is making sure you then follow through and that happens. And that's, as I say, that's the part that I see that doesn't happen very often. So, for instance, I've had a client previously where they were looking at making some redundancies. They needed to get rid of potentially about 70 roles. They went through this big process, but it was all very fluffy. And in the end, there was only 7 people went from these roles. Unfortunately, it meant that I had to go through the whole process again,
Oh gosh.
which was very difficult because people like, well, we've been here before, why are we going through this again? To get the right result, because they didn't follow through on the execution properly. They let other people change their mind about things. So it's about making sure you're doing the right thing and following through and
Right.
executing it,
Yes,
that you know
yes.
what
No,
you
that
want to
that
do.
makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
That's a very strong answer. So, Jackie, I mean, you've said a bit about this, but what are the risks that companies face if they don't get their people and processes aligned properly during change?
I think the biggest thing that you can see is that some of your good people will leave. You can lose some really good talent because they can see that could be absolute chaos possibly. If it's a new acquisition that you've had, then that whole business can fail if you haven't thought about the change properly. And I think the biggest thing that I see is about culture alignment. Often when a business is acquiring another business, they'll look at all sorts of things on the due diligence, but they don't look at culture because it's quite hard to measure the culture. But if it's not the right culture fit, then it is not going to work when businesses merge. And I also see, on the day one, sometimes when you've had an acquisition, there's no preparation there. They're not communicated properly. They don't understand the change. And it's also about the people that are in the current company. They're affected by the change as well. So it's making sure managers know how to manage that change. I try to do a change workshop with people when I first start, if they've not experienced it before, telling them, I think most of you on here probably have learned about the change curve, because it applies in all different aspects of your life. And so it's finding out, understanding where people are, but also understanding from my perspective as the person who leads the program normally, all of the managers are also going through the change themselves. So it's not just their teams they're leading through it, but they're going through the change themselves. So they're affected by it too. But the downside is, that if they don't do it properly, then the business can just fail. And that sale will have been a complete waste of money. And sometimes the business ends up closing.
Yes,
They
that's
lose all their top talent. And you get lots of absence problems as well.
right, right. So Nicole says that it's also about ensuring that you have the right person leading the change. Not every exec or manager or HR leader is equipped with the gravitas, knowledge, and skill to lead the execution and get buy-in. So that's an important point. What do you do if you
Absolutely.
haven't got the right person there, Jackie?
Yeah, it's about doing that. And I can give you a very good example of that actually. I was working for a not-for-profit and we were recruiting for 100 teachers to go and work in Abu Dhabi. And it was Easter. I remember it was Easter, it was the April time, and they needed these teachers in September. And teachers are on a term's notice. So we'd already missed the Easter holiday. It's like, and I'd been asked to come into this client, I was working on another part of the business, and they asked if I could come and give them some advice of what they needed to do and how to recruit these people. And there were 7 people sat around the table. So I spoke to them, and then I said, so who is going to lead the project? And they all looked around the table and they went, oh, well, we'll all do it. We'll just share it. Disaster waiting to happen.
Right, that's not the right answer.
You have to have a really strong leader and someone that is prepared to stand up to people and say, no, we can't do that. Or if we do that, this is the consequences.
Yeah.
And it's making sure people stick to the deadlines. So yeah, you've got to make sure at the beginning of any project that you've got the right person leading it, or it will fail. Absolutely will fail.
Right, that's a really interesting point.
Mm.
Katharina says that culture is often so ignored and is actually one of the most important elements of change, in her opinion. Unlike a tech or process change where you can switch on and switch off, culture isn't a switch you turn on or off, but it informs everything you do. And most execs, she says, struggle with understanding the impact of culture change because it's not necessarily tangible. However, it
Yeah,
is absolutely business critical.
absolutely. Yeah. I think she's been reading my book. Um, yeah, it is. I mean, I do struggle with business owners when, talking about the culture. Um, they just don't see it. You know, I worked on a big project in the public sector in the fire service a few years ago, a big change project, and it was about how we were bringing the uniform and the non-uniformed people together as one. And the chief had, gone around to all the fire stations and been doing all this big talk about it. And I was like following her around everywhere because I was the one there to say I was running the project. So he was saying, we want to be seen as one, not two different. And we were doing a lot of work on it. And then I came up to the HQ one day and saw all these parking spaces with names on for all the senior team. And it's like, so I went in, I said to him, what's all that about? And he said, well, we need somewhere to park 'cause parking was very short. I said, I thought you'd just been talking about a culture of building one team, and how you're all together, and now you've just created all these parking spaces. And he couldn't see why that was wrong.
Really,
He
really.
really didn't get it. So, as I say, because a lot of business owners I've worked with and managing directors, CEOs, they want to have this great culture, but they don't want to do anything to get it. And
Yes,
because it is quite intangible, it's hard. You do have to keep going on and on and on. But it does work, but you've got to work at it and you've
yes.
got to work at your values.
And
Yeah.
it's sort of the attitude. I'm quite happy to have a very inclusive culture as long as it doesn't affect me.
Yeah, as long as I don't have to do it. And you as the leader, they've got to live and breathe it. And if they don't, then it's not just won't work at all. They have to. And I've seen so many businesses where I go into help them, they say, oh well, our culture, we're fine. And I say, okay, so tell me what your company values are then if you've got them. And they say yes, but when they can't tell me what they are, they've got no idea. They've got them all plastered around on books or posters or whatever. But when I ask them to tell me what they are,
They
they
can't
don't know.
remember. No,
No,
no, it's not embedded in their mindset.
no, it's not.
No, that's very interesting. Thank you for that point, Katharina. So Jacqui, what are the biggest HR mistakes that businesses make during restructures or mergers? What do you see going wrong in the HR function?
I mean, mainly is around the communication, and it's about, planning is often not very good. But I think they are the main mistakes is about communication and making sure that everyone is communicated to. And the more people that get involved, the more complicated it can be. It's making sure that you've got those right channels of communication and that that's I think also from an HR point of view, it can be basic things like version controls of documents. I've seen so many, disastrous things for restructuring where everybody's working on different documents because it's not been given any version control. I know that sounds a bit anal, but it can be it's so important to make sure you've got the right document and everybody's working with the same data, because otherwise it can turn into complete disaster if you're making someone redundant or actually they're supposed to be staying and being promoted. because someone has changed their mind about what they wanted that person to be doing.
Yeah, yeah. So I think what you're saying, what you have been saying in a way throughout this, is that one of the key aspects of controlling change in a positive way is about consistency, consistency of
Absolutely.
leadership, consistency of communication, consistency, and that has to go right down to the documentation level.
It does. Yeah. And then that can also be difficult then from an HR point of view is when you get down to looking at people's contracts and job descriptions, if you're looking at doing acquisitions or you're looking at doing, selling the business or restructuring, when you then don't have that documentation in place, when you really need it, the bit that was the foundation, that if you put that in place to start with, and everybody's got that right, job descriptions, contracts, the right processes for the HR, when you then come to look to sell or you look to do a restructure, you can just look at your documentation, it's all there. But when it isn't there, it gets very difficult.
Yeah. And also I imagine the process for individuals, if everybody feels they are going through the same process, then there's a sense of fairness and equity. But if there's, it's a bit all over the place and some people appear to be being favored or being taken through a different process, I imagine that causes trouble too.
That causes trouble. And I think, we have to be more and more aware these days as well of, there is a culture out there of people, taking to tribunals because they've not been treated fairly. And yes, I get that. Sometimes people haven't been treated fairly, but there are some people out there who will just, make a big thing of saying, oh, I haven't been treated fairly, this hasn't been done. So you've got to make sure you've got all your processes right, you're treating everybody the same, which can be difficult with some managers. It's making sure, I train the managers on what they should and they shouldn't be saying, talking to them about, fairness, because if they've got some friends, they might treat them a bit differently. And I think that's where, when I go into a business, I don't know these people. So I have empathy for people when we're going through change and restructures or redundancies. I feel, I can understand how they feel. I was made redundant myself many, many years ago. But at the same time, I'm there to do a job and to get the right results. Whereas sometimes a manager can make the mistake of trying to help and make things worse by feeling sorry for that person, say, well, I'll try and get you something else or try and do it differently for you. And then you end up with, a mess that you've then got to sort out and
Yeah.
get the business out of a bit of a pickle.
Well, that must be one of the massive benefits for organizations of having you come in as that objective, stand above the personal kind of processes, and that they should be able to say, look, Jacqui's company is in charge of this. I can't do anything differently. And, they're kind of able to pass the buck to you, if
Yeah,
you
they
like.
are. And I get used to that because I say, well, if they don't like it, just blame us because that's
Yeah.
fine. We're used to that. We take that on part, but it is hard, when you're going through these type of mergers and any sort of change. It is very difficult. But you need to get to the outcome. There's always a reason why you need to get the business to the place it needs to be, and it's not always just to be able to make more money. Often it's to survive. And if you don't make these changes, the business won't survive, and then no one's going to end up with a job. So you have to be, quite ruthless sometimes of what you have to do. But there's a good reason to save some jobs, and for other people have to, unfortunately, you say goodbye to.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. So, in your experience, what's the difference between businesses that thrive after change and those that fail?
Mainly the culture.
Right. We're back to culture. Yeah.
Yeah, it's mainly the culture, but not always. It's about putting the people first. It's about appreciating the value of people, making sure that they've looked after people through that process and that they're still looking after them, that they understand where the business is going, that you've been truthful with people, um, saying how it is, what's going well, what's not going so well, how we can manage things in the future, not making any false promises, but again, making sure that the leader is the one that's actually there saying all these things. And, they're not hiding behind a door somewhere, that they're out there making sure that they are the one that's fronting up the business, and, facing it together really. So if you come through difficult times, people will support you. If you've got a good culture, they will support you when things get tough. But if you've not got a good culture, then people will go, and it's usually the good people that will leave you first. So communication and culture, definitely.
Right. No, that's very useful to know. HR is sometimes seen as just a support function. How do you demonstrate to the other people, the leadership team, whoever it is, how do you show its direct impact when you're called in and working with an organization? How do you make it important?
Yeah, I mean, it's making sure that they understand the importance of people as in looking at, retention, making sure you're keeping the right people in the business, looking at productivity. Depends on what type of business it is, but we need to find some measures that we can show that is going to see how important HR is in making the business work. It's not just about the transactional HR, which is what a lot of people tend to see HR as. That's all you do. I mean, sometimes with when I'm working with clients, I will say to them, these people are not right for the business because they're not doing their job very well, they're losing money, or sort of salespeople who are not bringing in the sales, and we have to take a view on that to say the best approach will be to exit these people because it's not working, and it's so that we're not. So this is where I think the pink and fluffy people perhaps go, well, we'll give them another chance, but they've had lots of chances, and we need to make sure now that we're focused on what the business needs, reducing absence rates, what the cost of that is. There's all those types of things that we could look at, and if you've got a good retention rate, then that makes sure that you're not recruiting so many people, that the costs are kept down for recruitment, because that's expensive to keep recruiting lots of people. Goes back to culture. If you've got a poor culture, you will keep losing people. You'll have to keep recruiting. You should always recruit people based against your values, and then you get the right people coming into the business.
Right, right. I mean, I guess ultimately, the top team are going to look at the bottom line,
Yeah,
and that's where you can actually demonstrate the power of HR and the need for HR.
yeah, definitely. Yeah.
So, finally, Jacqui, how do you balance the needs of the business with the needs of, the individual people when you go in and advise?
Yeah. I mean, I think, as I've said, it is important that people are looked after, and that they're treated fairly. I don't like to see people being treated unfairly, but at times you do have to, you know, restructure businesses, which means saying goodbye to some people. The overall aim for me is always is what is it the business needs? What are the goals of the business? What's it trying to achieve? And how do we do that in a very professional way, and make sure that we're treating people fairly? So, because there's no point in keeping lots of people in the business or creating a structure for people because that works, really well for them. But actually, the business isn't going to make any money. When lots of HR people will know, but not everyone, unfortunately, not all HR people, that when you're creating a new structure, you don't put in the names of the people who are currently doing those roles. You create a structure of what the business needs moving forward. And then you look at what that structure is, and then you look to see who you've got and see whether those people actually fit those roles or not. Right people, right seats. Jim Collins, great book, Good to Great. You have to have the right people in there. You can't have people just because, well, they've been here for such a long time and they're really good, and but if they're not performing, or even if they are performing, but they're still not a right culture fit. I've seen lots of people who've had someone work in a business, and they just say, well, they do a good job, but then, that's just the way they are. They're rude to people, and, it's not, you can't have that with people. It's not acceptable. It doesn't fit the culture. So I am quite stern sometimes.
Good. I'm sure you need to be. I'm sure you need to be, but
I think also with my approaches, I get some CEOs who say, well, I want to do this, that, and the other. I never tell them they can't do anything. We won't do anything that's illegal, But I will say to them, you can't, I'll never say to you, you cannot do it. I'll say, well, if that's what you want to do, then these are the different options you've got, and these are the risks that go with it. And then you decide which one you want to take, which risk it is that you want to go for. And some of them will go for a really high risk strategy because that's the outcome that they want. So I will find ways to get them the outcome that they're looking for without breaking the law, but also making sure that they know what the risks are. I don't like the HR approach of, oh, you can't do that because the policy says that doesn't work. And that's why it makes HR not popular with some leaders, because HR says you can't do this, can't do that. Well, you can do anything you like, but it's going to cost you some money because you might have to pay some people to leave.
Right, right. No, that is a very focused way of looking at it that I imagine really speaks to, leaders in those sorts of situations. That's
Yeah.
fascinating. Jacqui, thank you so much. Are you happy to take some questions from the floor,
Yes.
as it were? Because we have
Yeah.
one really interesting question from Sukaina in the chat. She says, I have a question, please. It's very specific. I've been requested to present myself for an election, one of three candidates to preside over an association. The other two are male and European, and without as much experience or equivalent qualifications. What would you believe the best way to approach is to ensure a positive result?
Oh, that's interesting.
It is, isn't it?
Yeah. God, I think about that one. So could you just read that again, Lucy?
Yes, sure. Or, yes. I have been requested to present myself for an election, one of three candidates to preside over an association. The other two are male and European, and without as much experience or equivalent qualifications. What do you think the best way for Sukaina to approach this would be?
Hmm. So do you know what the association is trying to
Sukaina,
achieve?
do kind of
Yeah,
unmute yourself and
yeah,
chat and talk.
sure. Thank you so much. Thank you, Jacqui.
Okay.
It's a Swiss association of an old school. Yes, it's a school of the old students association.
Okay. So what are their aims? What is it they want to achieve then by having
Well,
had
there's a president of the association which changes every 4 years.
Oh, okay.
You're running the whole association of the old students that are across the world. It's based in Switzerland. And there's people all over the world, and I'm outside. I'm in Dubai.
Okay.
And I manage Dubai already anyway as a representative.
Okay. So I think I would be looking at something presenting on cultures and how it would be including all different cultures and about how cultures are different in each country, because there's lots of countries you go to that things that we do here in the UK won't be seen as acceptable in that country. So I think I'd be looking at trying to look about how you could do something cross-divisional cultures and how you would make that work, the types of things that you would do. I think that might
Right.
make you look might make you look different.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Okay.
That's a great response, Jacqui. Thank you for responding to that very specific
Thank
question.
you.
That's great. Thank you, Sukaina. Paula, you've got your hand up.
Hey, Jacqui, fascinating, and I love this kind of question and answer way of doing things because I thought it brought out some really interesting things that I haven't heard from you before. But so it wasn't covered, so I just wanted to ask now. You're saying about the merger situation, and I wondered, are you actually with your regular clients and things? Are you involved pre-merger? Because it feels like if you come in, it's like you're firefighting after poor decisions and lack of cultural awareness and that sort of stuff. So do you have a pre-merger element to your delivery?
Sometimes I work with clients before that because I often work with them they bring me in for the TUPE transfer phase.
Yeah.
So that's where we're bringing the people in then, and that's where sometimes that I will then say to them, so what about the change side? How are you going to interact? Put these people into the business, and they're like, well, I don't know, I hadn't even thought about that. Don't they just turn up on day one?
Sure.
So they haven't thought about that. The bit where I don't get involved where I would like to be involved is at the stage prior to that, when they're doing their due diligence, and look at doing some sort of cultural due diligence. But I've never been involved in that stage, unfortunately, because I don't think many businesses see that as being particularly important, whereas I think it should be part of the due diligence myself.
I agree. I'm so pleased that you said that, because I see what you do as it's more like a kind of Venns. So like there's an overlap with each section, and like you say, the due diligence is the piece that you'd like to be involved in, because then it's a cascade effect for everything else. And I've heard you speak before, and you've spoken about how getting certain people out of an organisation in a compassionate and a visionary way actually releases them into a world that they're more often than not happier in. So by doing this, because I've heard you speak, and it was during this 90-person layoff, and like how the company were executing in the advised way. They were doing what you said. They and I'm guessing they were following their script, and they were all on the same page, and they were all on the same version of those pages. And hearing you speak during something that for a lot of people, especially the embedded HR people, they'd have been having sleepless nights over it. And I remember you had that almost like this spring in your step, because it was liberating a company that was going to go down the chute if you hadn't done this. And I think it's an area that people don't perceive or understand the huge value that you bring, and I think you've really articulated that beautifully. And I think it's so important. The thing that you like, I noted, I made copious notes, and you said about the culture is certain people in the organisation. You said they don't see it, and it's intangibles. And I think what you're doing is sharing this in a tangible way, and metaphors and stories and narratives. And I've put down to get your ebook and things, and I'm sure that's what you explain in your book. And I think when Lucy said what sets you apart, I think all of these things that I've just spoken of are what sets you apart, is that someone who's unhappy in an organisation, and I think of my mum, who started at Vodafone very early doors, like one of the only payroll people there, and then it wasn't even doing mobile phones. And then she had such a horrible experience that if there'd have been someone like you dealing with these things, and also HR advice, I think these organisations that become huge could transform with this kind of due diligence, this understanding, and this. I think what you've got is way bigger than just this merger piece and stuff. And it's a joy to hear. So I haven't really got a question. I just want to say what you're doing is amazing. And I think you've articulated it beautifully. And the fact of sharing intangibles is one of your superpowers. And I'm just thrilled to hear more of what you do. And I thank you.
Thank you, Paula.
Thanks, Paula. Katharina, you've put you've put something in the chat which is quite long. I think it would be better if you spoke direct to Jacqui, if you're able to unmute and say that to her.
Yeah, sure, I can. I didn't want to say, because I can't put on my video, and I felt it was a bit rude to speak when you can't see me. But yeah, again, Jacqui, thank you so much. I think it's really great get what you shared today. No, what I was just saying was, in terms of, you mentioned the term outcomes just before the first question came through, and I just said I really like that conversation, because I'm working with a client at the moment with an organization, and I realized that the outcomes conversation is very rare to businesses. Like a lot of businesses where I'm a change manager, change lead, and I work in the transformation space. And I realized that a lot of the times organization focus on delivering the change, et cetera, and they don't think about the outcomes. And one of the things I'm getting my organization to do is to actually change the narrative and talk about change, HR, culture change in terms of outcomes. What's the outcomes that you're looking to achieve? And therefore, what activities and deliverables do you need to put in place to achieve this outcome? And I've seen how this works. Why? Because you're able to articulate change in a very people-centric, simple, tangible way. and then you commit the execs and their teams to delivering those outcomes. And I realized that actually that's where sometimes the disconnect happens, where when you talk about change, whether that is a technology change or any kind of change, you take the focus off of the deliverable and the activity, and you focus on the end goal, the end state that makes sense to every individual person. So whether you are the cleaner, whether you're the receptionist, whether you're the tech person, whether you're the CEO, if you're able to articulate what the outcomes are and are able to align that to each individual person as far as their work is concerned, it makes that whole journey to deliver change, to get exec buy-in, to communicate, to engage much easier, because you take the eyes off of the deliverable and you focus on the end goal, the end state. So I just wanted to add that.
Yeah, definitely. The outcome is always, because also it's proof for you then, as you know, if you've gone in to do your work with the client, that you ask them at the beginning, what outcome are they looking for? So at the end of the project, then you can actually see that they got the outcome that they wanted, rather than them saying, oh, well, you haven't delivered this, or what about search and searches? Did you get the outcome that you wanted? It makes it much more measurable.
Absolutely. And that's why I love your alignment piece, because I'm very much about alignment, people alignment, strategy alignment, very much so, creating almost like connecting the dots. I think the reason why people leave organizations, the reason why some people have lack of job satisfaction or anything like that, because they can't connect the dots between my day-to-day job and what the strategy is trying to achieve. If you're able to connect the dots, and if you're able to create that narrative for people, it almost does half the job done. People begin to see, oh, okay, great. I now see how this impacts me as a person, and I want to therefore engage with it more because it makes sense to me. Yeah,
definitely.
Great point. Thank you, Katharina. Does anybody have any other questions or comments for Jacqui? I think this has been absolutely fascinating. Do put your hand up, or just talk, or put anything in the chat. If you want to connect with Jacqui and get a free call with her, the best way to do this at the moment is to connect with her on LinkedIn, Jacqui Mann, or you could email people@jmassociates.org to request your call. Please say you were on this session with her. Okay, well, I think we must have covered everything, Jacqui.
Okay.
Oh, and Michaela says, don't forget to ask for the book. Yes, so you can, if you haven't put book in the chat, in which case we will send you a copy of Jacqui's book, an e-version of it, but you can ask her on a call for it.
Yeah.
So, Jacqui, thank you so much. That has really been incredibly enlightening and clarifying, and a fantastic piece of information. I'm really, really glad to have understood the PACE framework. I think it's brilliant. And lucky are all the organizations who you work with. They obviously have the most amazing HR executive function in you. So your experience is obviously very well worthwhile. So
Thanks,
thank you
Lucy.
very much again. And everybody can get in touch with Jacqui and get more information from her, as I said, on LinkedIn, or through emailing people@jmassociates.org. Okay, thank you very much, everybody. Thank you for being here, and we will see you next time. Bye for now.
Bye.